Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 26 of the Spiritual Brainstorm. Today, I'd like to revisit the topic of extraterrestrials and try to provide a definite answer on who they are, what they are, how are they related to us or not related to us. Um, because I find there's still a lot of confusion on um, what they are, whether they're a physical phenomenon, whether they're in the astral plane, whether they are in the mental plane, whether they are um, holograms or an illusion. And there's just so many things that are being said about ETs, and I wanted to put it all into a broader perspective. So, when I usually deal with complex topics, I always like to go back to the roots of and the basics of everything. The roots is all is vibration. If everything is a vibration, that is the sort of common denominator between us and extraterrestrials. If they are not a vibration, then they're not part at all of this universe or even this multiverse, which is centered around vibrations and interactions between different vibrations. So, whenever you actually witness, for instance, two atoms, like a hydrogen atom and a carbon atom colliding, or even two billiard balls colliding on a pool table, that is the visual representation or the interface that your brain simulates or generates in order for you to understand extremely complex interactions of bundles of self contained vibrations and information that basically just exchange information and saying, I contain this information, which is, for instance, my speed is 10, and you contain that information, and your speed is 0. And if certain conditions are met, and we exchange information, then my speed should go to 0, and your speed should go to 10 if we sort of touch. And so it basically functions just the same as a computer language, where all you have is ones and zeros, binary code, which is the equivalent of vibrations. And then on top of that, you just have layers upon layers of what you call higher level languages. Higher level languages. And that's the kind of programming language that you use in order not to be lost in ones and zeros. And then you have interfaces, various interfaces like Windows, MS-DOS, Linux, and many more. And those are just visual representations for interactions between ones and zeros, fundamentally. But nobody experiences reality, or vibrations in our case, as ones and zeros or as just vibrations, because we'd go mad. Within a single atom, there is a near infinite amount of information that can be stored inside of it as vibrations. Or actually, an infinite amount. It's not near infinite, it's infinite amount. But that's why we have this sort of reality construct, which we call 3D. It's everything that you can experience with your five senses. And it just creates, in terms of our eyes, for instance, our eyesight, or our body, for instance, it creates a very convenient way to restrict our power in manipulating ones and zeros or pure vibrations in order not to mess up reality. It's a very delicate balance between gaining more power and influence over manipulating vibrations. For instance, your body contains within itself information saying when I touch something with my hand, it has to move in this and this and this way, provided that its weight is, blah blah blah, and my muscles or my strength is X, whatever. You could just all summarize it to um, conditions and rules for manipulating information, exchanging information, and manipulating information. So you're not really touching anything with your hand, but you're transferring information to whatever object you're seeing, you think you're seeing, to say, please take a new appearance. Almost as if you were sending vibrations with just your mind, influencing, for instance, a ball, and saying, now your position has to be this and this and this and this. And obviously, it's much easier to sort of experience those limitations as a body than just as pure mind with artificial boundaries or limits, like this. That's basically seeing the matrix as experienced from the inside or from the outside. But how is all of this related to ETs, you may find, because I've been rambling on here for what, 5-6 minutes? Well, on the grander scale of things, you could see our planet, Earth, as a reality construct itself that is inside of it. It's all just pure vibrations. With consciousnesses on it that create a sort of a bubble around their reality construct. And that bubble includes the entire universe. That is, if the predominant view of the consciousnesses on the planet is materialism, that is scientific materialism, well, they are isolated in a sort of a consciousness bubble that does not allow for all the possible parallel realities, an infinite amount of parallel realities, to permeate that bubble. And you could say that ETs are basically, so we're living in our own universe. And the multiverse is simply maybe, and well, actually it's for sure, but let's just say maybe there are other similar consciousness bubbles on other planets of other ETs. I don't know how to, okay, let's just say they're humanoid. And they are in their own consciousness bubble. And if these two are not compatible, that is, if they have nothing in common except vibrations, the underlying substrate is vibrations, then they cannot be allowed to communicate. They will never be able to interact. We, for instance, since we're in the scientific materialism and we have the speed of light as the ultimate limit and all of these kind of restrictions for anything to sort of be able to permeate that bubble, an alien race that might exist, well, first of all, some people are mistaken in believing that in another galaxy, for instance, in our visible universe, say here we're seeing a galaxy, it's spinning around like this. We see a far distant galaxy with a telescope. And we say, well, maybe there's life there. Maybe there's smart aliens there. Now, that may be the case within our reality construct, but if that is so, because our consciousness is limited to scientific materialism and we cannot imagine anything outside of it, then whatever aliens can exist on those planets are going to be beings just like us that are also in the scientific materialism bubble. Otherwise, they are outside of our universe. They are in an other parallel multiverse where they have another reality construct which allows them, for instance, to roam freely around their own parallel reality, their own universe, and go to galaxies and stuff, but they are not within our universe. Since we are limited with scientific materialism, then any life that is inhabiting other planets, we project our own beliefs onto that reality, which means that we are isolated in our own reality, and therefore we have no chance of communicating with those on a 3D plane. Now, that's the basics. So you can imagine that there are a near infinite amount of parallel realities and reality constructs on planets, or even pure energy beings for that matter, that don't even require a planet, that are experiencing themselves, let's say like this bubble of pure energy, it's just experiencing themselves within infinity. And all it requires, because everything is a vibration, all it requires is a logical, self contained, kind of logical, self contained interface or experience or limitations for an experience. That's it. Just like with zeros and ones, you can generate a, how should I say, a text-based interface like MS-DOS, which is very, very primitive, or you can develop something like Windows 10, or you could maybe even in the future will have holographic interfaces, with AR, VR. Who knows what the future will bring us? And you can understand that each of these is sort of a quantum leap in your perception of reality. You could say that this is like 2D, this is 3D, and this is 4D. But it doesn't really make sense to speak in terms of dimensions. It's more a question of how much power do you have over manipulating vibrations, how conscious you are of that kind of power. That is, how conscious you are in knowing that you are within a reality construct, or blindly sort of believing your reality construct is the only reality. That is one giant leap, is also sort of understanding that you are in a reality construct, and that you are just one experience within infinity, one possible experience within infinity, given the rules that you've set upon yourself with your beliefs in structuring reality. For instance, people mistakenly believe also that there's only one truth on this planet. Well, for instance, if you look at our reality construct in the past, when, say, the first men were there, like Adam and Eve, or there were very little number of humans on Earth, where do you think all the legends and tales and all that stuff, like of giants, of dragons, and all that, come from? Well, the less people you have on the planet, the less stable your reality construct is. Because if you have only like 20 people, for instance, their collective beliefs, because there's nobody to contradict them, their collective beliefs have a tremendous influence on the experiences they have. See? So they may have actually experienced dragons as a physical reality from their point of view, and then because we are also in our own reality construct, we retroactively then explain their experience by saying it's a fairy tale, or it's just dinosaurs or remnants of dinosaurs, or it was a big bird or whatever, something to sort of justify that those things never existed. When in fact, because we are in a sort of reality construct of scientific materialism, and since our consciousness is 100% in control, it will retroactively change the past, so that the proofs that you'll see, like skeletons and stuff of dead animals, will disprove any of these tales and legends, and will allow us to keep our limited beliefs, such as scientific materialism. because we cannot be contradicted within our reality construct, except if we ourselves allow for a breach or some kind of change of consciousness which allows this reality construct to evolve. And so, what does this mean basically? It's it means that the moment that we change our beliefs, it is as if some of these parallel realities can now merge or create links or bridges with our own reality. And so they become part of our universe. So where previously this galaxy could only host a materialist, scientific materialism kind of style of life, and could never communicate with us because of the distance and the speed of light and blah blah blah. Then suddenly, if you change your belief system and you start finding explanations for this to be possible, then suddenly it can transform what you can experience. And what I really like about this explanation is that it kind of mirrors the formation of neurons in a brain. So, if you've ever seen a video of the connections that neurons make with each other in a brain, um, it's actually as if our reality construct, is one isolated neuron that is on one of these threads, and it can then form bonds with other parallel neurons or structures, which, of course, from its point of view, do not exist until a link is formed. Um, and so, a nice way to sort of present the true appearance or form of God or of infinity is like a giant brain, where sort of streams of consciousness and reality constructs pop up and appear in different parts of an infinitely vast void, and then grow and grow and grow in terms of their consciousness, and grow until they sort of meet each other, and then they try to find bridges between themselves, for the only purpose there is experiencing infinity in more and more sophisticated ways, more and more complex ways. And so when we are debating, for instance, whether ETs are 3D materialism, or whether they're in the astral plane or the mental plane or any other kind of debate, this is the wrong approach. The only valid question is, what on what level of consciousness and what reality construct are they part of? Are they? It's just like saying that Windows is the mental plane of MS-DOS or something, or the astral plane to MS-DOS. Ultimately, it's just a sort of a consciousness bubble, a reality construct, which has its own kind of rules and is isolated from the outside based on the consciousnesses of those who live inside of it, and which allows for different kinds of experiences to arrive and to be experienced by the people there depending on their consciousness. So for people that are scientific materialists but still believe in aliens, they will experience aliens as 3D. For those that are familiar with spirituality and all that stuff, they will experience probably aliens as being part of the astral plane. And yet another set of humans might experience them as demonic entities if they're very spiritual and religious. It is just that within infinity, of course, all of those versions, all of those interpretations of what ETs are exist. That's not the core question to ask. We are obliged to give them a form because otherwise, well, formlessness means you cannot have an experience if it's formless. So just like with ones and zeros, you construct an interface to be able to experience combinations of ones and zeros in a way which has meaning, which is logical. In the same way, we create an interface to experience vibrations, pure vibrations, in a way which is logical and consistent. And it's just about finding the right update, kind of, to our interface to allow us to connect to other realities, just like neurons making neural connections, but let's say in a harmonious and conscious way. That is, if we're still fighting about ETs and whether they're physical or non-physical and all these things, then we are still stuck in our bubble and our virtual sort of reality construct. We're not looking at it from the outside. We're not seeing that ultimately it doesn't matter if they're physical or not physical. That's not the point. The point is to which kind of or which kind of versions of which kind of interface you want to build to experience extraterrestrials. What kind of interface? In what kind of way do you want to relate to them? As unconscious beings that are still in scientific materialism that experience them as 3D, or as people that are conscious of the fact that we are in a reality construct and what that implies, and that ultimately everything is a vibration, and that if they come, then we understand that we're not really seeing them as their true form, just the same as we're not seeing us with our true form, because we are obliged to generate an interface to have an experience. And that opens up so much more possibilities than to stick to just one version of what ETs are or not. So that's the first thing. The second thing is ETs, extraterrestrials, implies that they're not from Earth. But there can very well be a sort of a fork here in reality where part of humanity, say, maybe it's an alternative version of what happened in Atlantis, or maybe it's Atlantis' descendants, which sort of forked off into another parallel reality of Earth, which split because the consciousnesses of certain survivors led to scientific materialism. But then there's another version of Earth where they stuck to their own reality construct, and it's still Earth. And then suddenly you create a bridge between those two realities. Are those extraterrestrials? Well, no. Just like you wouldn't say that just because a leaf is on a different branch, it's not part of the same tree. So it's very, very difficult to untangle all of this. The same is, for instance, if somewhere in our future there is a fork and part of humanity goes on to colonize other planets with a new reality construct which transcends scientific materialism and then invents ways to sort of communicate with its past and send messages, are those extraterrestrials? So again, pointless question. The ET is a very poor sort of way of even debating about other consciousnesses from other planets, because ultimately it's much more simple to view them as simply bubbles of self-contained consciousnesses in an infinite void, which sometimes sort of manage to create bridges between themselves, just like neurons in a brain, and then sort of create an even higher level of experience. That's probably what ascension is also, is that for the moment we're like an isolated neuron cut from everything because we're in our own kind of box and we're not letting any other reality construct permeate our own sort of collectively generated reality or illusion. And ascension is when you open up these gates and allow for new experiences, new information to penetrate it. Now, there's one channeler that I really like. It's called Kim Michaels, and he wrote about what are ETs. And he says they're in the mental plane, many of them. And I don't really agree with all of what he says here from the so-called ascended masters. But what is really important is how we relate to extraterrestrials. And too often, and this is where I really agree with him. Too often, too often we view them as our saviors, as people that are coming from the outside and bring us new information that will help us solve all our problems. So this mindset does nothing to bring about the physical manifestation of a golden age. In fact, it only delays the golden age because too many among the top 10% have taken on this passive mindset of waiting for a sign instead of raising their consciousness and co-creating the sign of a new age. This is really, really important. That is, if we continue to view ETs as somebody is going to help us raise our consciousness, that is the wrong way to think about it. And if you've ever watched neurons form in a brain, they're actually, there are other videos here that are really interesting. It goes both ways, basically. Here, this one. In this video, you see that it kind of, both neurons reached one to the other. It's not like only one neuron was passively waiting for the other neuron to connect to it. It's really a two-way process. And so that's where our responsibility lies, is to raise our consciousness enough so that our interactions with whatever we call ETs is on this kind of as a neural network on an equal footing, and not because we're conscious of this mechanism that I've just described, rather than stuck in one or another dogma, whether it's scientific materialism or even spiritual dogmas. It's the same. Here, if you see reality as an interface, then none of them are necessarily true. All of them are true at the same time. And then you can sort of make a conscious decision of what form or what interface you want to choose, because that is the most practical or the most convenient for you, for your experience, the experience that you want to have. And that is completely different than deciding that yours is the only true one. You see, because we're obliged to give a form to things rather rather than see them just as abstract vibrations. It's better to now raise the consciousness enough that we are able to choose the ways we want to interact with those vibrations, rather than stick to one model. And astral, mental, physical, 3D, all of those are terms. It's like saying, for instance, Java, the Java language, or the Windows interface, or C++, or whatever. The term is less important than the experience. So I hope you found this video interesting. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and see you next time.